Hello everyone! For this presentation, I'm going to talk about the effect secondary succession has on a community cleared for agriculture. In other words, I'm going to talk about what happens after land, particularly a forest, is cleared for agriculture, farming, pasture, things along those lines. Before I dive into the specifics, we need to understand some important concepts. First, these three important concepts are succession, disturbance, and secondary succession. So with that being said, succession is the process or development of change in the number of species in a community over time as a result of abiotic and biotic factors. Disturbance is an event brought on by abiotic factors that harms or kills some individuals and creates new opportunities for other individuals to grow and reproduce. Secondary succession, which is important for this presentation specifically, is a type of succession that occurs after a disturbance impacts the community but does not kill all life and still leaves behind some or all of the soil and nutrients present before the disturbance happened. Before I dive into the effects that secondary succession has on a community cleared for agriculture, it's important to understand why the clearing of land for agriculture is an example of secondary succession. So commonly what happens is forests are cleared to make room for farmland. Farmers and other people will cut down trees and clear vegetation to plant crops. The clearing of this land for agriculture is an example of secondary succession because this disturbance, it still leaves the soil and nutrients intact, along with some species following the deforestation and clearing of land. Now that we have all of the background information, we can now specifically talk about the effect secondary succession has on a community cleared for agriculture. There are three big effects that can occur. The first being that many different species of trees and plants can be destroyed. The trees and plants impacted will obviously vary from community to community, as each community can have different species, especially if we're talking about different biomes. Obviously, there's not going to be the same species of plants and trees in the tundra as there's going to be in a boreal forest, for instance. The second big effect is that many different species of animals and other organisms can be killed. As mentioned before, these animals and organisms will vary from community to community, as each community can have different species. For instance, many deer from a community in a deciduous forest biome could be killed as a result of a disturbance. The last big effect is that this succession creates the opportunity for new species to colonize the land. The soil and nutrients are still intact, which means new plant species can form. These new plant species can attract new species of animals and other organisms. In specifics of agriculture, with the soil and nutrients still being intact, it can make it easier for the farmer to plant his crops and for them to grow. These crops in turn could attract insects and other animals such as bunnies and deer. For this, we will look at an example of secondary succession in agriculture. More specifically, we will look at a case study. The title of this case study is Factors Influencing Early Secondary Succession in Ecosystem Carbon Stocks in the Brazilian Atlantic Forest. This case study was conducted in the Atlantic Forest in Rio de Janeiro State, Brazil. For this study, researchers collected data from two different sites experiencing early secondary succession as a result of land that was previously used for agriculture, more specifically pasture, to see the impact this succession or the agriculture had on the land. The researchers, they collected data on things like the relationship between soil and environmental conditions, carbon stocks, and plant community attributes, basically what plants were there or near the land that was used for pasture. After conducting the study, the researchers found that the areas within the two different sites that had a high concentration of clay in the soil and that were close to adjacent forests experienced much more species richness, meaning there was more plant life, there was more species present than areas farther from adjacent forests with low clay concentrations. Furthermore, the study also found that in the presence of shrubs, it limited the growth of plants and species richness in the areas that had shrubs. With this in mind, the researchers were able to come to the final conclusion that the distance from adjacent forests was the biggest influence on how fast the agricultural land would recover from the succession. They found, more specifically, that the closer the agricultural land was to the adjacent forest, the faster the land would recover. Thanks for watching. This last slide is just my list of references.